Hello everybody. Today I just want to make a short video going through symbolism of the book of Jonah and its astrological meanings. I went to church a couple Sundays ago and I heard them talk about book of Jonah, and I think more pastors should give credit to whom credit is due, and that would be to the astrologers of ancient history and the mythographers. But of course, pastors aren't familiar with mythology or mythography, so that's why I'm making this video. And we're going to just talk about the astrological symbolism in the book of Jonah. Here we go. Being only 4 chapters, we can summarize chapter by chapter. Jonah 1 to 5. So Jonah is at sea. His first question to ask is, why is Jonah? So the first question to ask is, why is Jonah sleeping during the storm? We see a similar theme in the rest of Jesus during the storm. Mark chapter 4. Or on the boat in the flood of Noah before they enter the rest of the new world, or in the Exodus story when they enter the promised land of rest from the wilderness. So it's just found it interesting. Why is Jonah sleeping during the storm? And the storm actually doesn't stop. That's what it says. It's like, so it's here's just chapter 1 verse 4 to 6. It says, Jehovah cast a great wind on the sea, and there is a great tempest in the sea, and the ships reckoned to be broken, and the readers are afraid and cry each unto his God, cast the goods that are in the ship into the sea, to make it light of them. Jonah hath gone down unto the sides of the vessel, and he lieth down and is fast asleep. The chief of the company draweth near to him, and say to him, Wait, what to thee, O sleeper? Rise, call unto thy God, and maybe God bethinketh himself of us, and we do not perish. Isn't it strange that Jonah sleeps during the tempest? What can explain it? Was Noah acting in faith like Jesus? No, the story explains that Jonah was escaping God through his sleep. He was in denial, but who can deny a storm? So the vessel, of course, represents like the temple of the soul, or the body of the soul, or the body of the zodiac, from which these characters or these planets and the sun and the moon and the stars are actors. In Jonah 1 verse 11 he says, What do we do to thee that the sea may cease from us, for the sea is more and more tempestuous? So that's evidence that the sea is not ceasing, and yet Jonah seems to be able to go to sleep in the sea quite easily, just as he fell asleep. So this is evidence of a mythical archetype. Jonah goes down the sides of the boat just as the sun goes down the sides of the zodiac. The vessel, of course, is the body of the zodiac, as in Egypt with Nut and Jeb. And we have a picture from Egypt with Nut, the sky goddess, and Geb on the earth. Of course, the sun, the moon, and stars, they travel around the edge of the zodiac, just like they would travel along the body of Nut. Sleep is due to the fact that the daily cycle of the zodiac, as the sun goes down, so do we sleep and escape the light of day or the evening storms. The crew members cast lots and decide that Jonah is fleeing from the face of Yahweh. 4 seasons. Jonah responds, and he saith unto them, Lift me up and cast me into the sea, and the sea doth cease from you, for I know that on my account this great tempest is upon you. So Jonah knows he's in denial, and he finally admits it when all of his crew members cast lots and find him guilty. So he's lifted up prior to being cast into the sea. So I thought that was an odd note if you think of this as a true history. Why is Noah or Jonah lifted up before he's cast into the sea? But it's to show that just as Christ is lifted up before being sealed in the tomb, or as Noah is lifted above the earth, or landing on dry land, or the bronze serpent is lifted up by Moses to give life, so also is Jonah being lifted up. because it's a cycle. The ship cannot do something simple like turning back around to go to dry land because it is not. It's on its course of the ecliptic. Yeah, and then it's just show evidence for that here. They cannot row to turn back. The men just find it impossible to row to turn back in the storm. So Jonah is cast into the sea, just as the sun would appear to be cast into the sea on a flat earth model, or how faith can cast mountains into the sea in the New Testament. The storm stops just as Jesus stops the storm by a word in the Gospels. This is another sort of miracle of the storm being stopped, and God's acting very actively, and the storm represents the anger of God in this situation, just as like the night cycle would represent the judgment of God. Then comes the 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, just as Jesus would be 3 days in the tomb, representing the 3 days of the winter solstice. So we have to pay careful attention when we see these symbolic numbers being repeated. It's giving us a clue to the timeline and the point on the zodiac that it could be talking about, which would be the 3 days would be the solstices mostly, or the equinoxes. on the annual cycle, just as the Passover has a 3 days between the Passover and the first fruits. So John 1:17, and Jonah pointed the great Jonah 1:17, great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah is in the bowels of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Chapter 2 is Jonah's prayer, in which the fish hears his words and vomits him up miraculously on dry land. So dry land is another symbol. And the most notable verse is verse 2 in his prayer, and because it has to do with the doctrine of hell in Christianity, you have the word from the belly of Sheol, I have cried, thou hast heard my voice. So it is the word for Sheol is one of 3 words translated into hell in the King James Version, which of course means that you can pray and be heard by God in hell. Originally would have been used, I think the Jewish people use the word Sheol to describe the grave, but he's obviously alive in this place of Sheol. It's really the Sheol of the soul, I would say. This represents the belly of the earth on the zodiac, which has constellation of the whale, or the belly of the goddess, prior to birthing the new sun or son of God. 3 days in the dead movement of the sun brings literal new life with the spring season. So rise, go unto Nineveh, the great city, proclaim unto it the proclamation that I am speaking unto thee. And Jonah riseth and goeth unto Nineveh, according to the word of Jehovah, and Nineveh hath been a great city before God, a journey of 3 days. Here we see the 3 days again, followed by the 40 days, and we should recall the proclamation of the Psalms. Heavens declare his righteousness, for God himself is the judge. Selah. In other words, the Mazzaroth zodiac, which is the heavens here, is the Logos proclamation of God, and Jonah is fulfilling its role. The word of the Lord is the law of the Lord, etc., as in the law of Moses. The 40 days to overturn Nineveh is the same 40 years in the wilderness of Exodus, or the 40 days of Jesus preaching after his resurrection, or the 40 years between the crucifixion and the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. This is the most, as it would be called, the second Exodus motif. If you haven't heard about that, there's good books on it you can ask me about. This is the most prolific number to those philosophers in the first century. I believe historian Philo talks about how says that. It has many meanings, just as the myths are intended to have. The foremost is the transition between the old and the new creation, arising from the 40 days between the Feast of First Fruits and Pentecost, or from the Passover totaling 50 days, which arrives at the wheat harvest, as spoken of symbolically in the revelation of Christ, the harvest of souls coming into their divine functioning nature, overturning the zodiac through the spring season. And it also talks about that in the New Testament, where in the book of Acts it says the whole world was turned upside down. So also this is the overturning of Nineveh. Understanding all that, what would God do to these characters who reform and turn their worlds upside down? And that is where you stop and you think, okay, what is God actually going to do with the Ninevites, since they are this part characters on the zodiac, right? So when you think of the zodiac, it can't help but perform its cycles. It can't help but perform its reformations or repentances. Understanding all that, what would God do? But they could not help but reform, as nature tells, and also God could not help but hold back his wrath instead of bringing the food in its season. Jonah is displeased at the goodness of God upon the Ninevites, so he doesn't like this cycle that he's staring at. And Jonah, what does he do? He goes forth from the city, sits under the east side of the city, and that's where the sun rises. The city is the zodiac. You have to think of these cities, people, bodies, all as zodiac characters. And maketh himself there a booth, and sitteth under it on the shade until that he seeth what is in the city. So it has to do with seeing. So east side of the zodiac, you have the spring equinox, and you have the head of the zodiac. So you have basically the forehead. So he's waiting until he can see what's going to come down, and the sun is going to rise, and it's going to enter the spring season on the ecliptic. The east side of the city being where the sun rises, and it's opposite the Feast of Booths, so he makes himself a booth there. It says, Jonah is given shade by the gourd until the worm rises at the dawn of the next day and smites the gourd. So he has shade for a day, and then he is stripped of that shade and has to deal with the heat of the sun. So it's very much the heat of the truth. And and then it smites his head, it says. So that's, of course, very symbolic of the 6 a.m. where the sun rises and it hits the head of the zodiac, or the head of the day, and begins its journey throughout the body of the day. Jonah is accused by God of feeling sorry for a plant which he was not labored, and how much more did it please God to forgive a city of 120,000 beings. This final verse of the book finishes, Jonah 4:11. And have I not pity on Nineveh, the great city in which there are more than 12 myriads of human beings? So this idea of 12 comes up again and again and again. Number is the language of the gods. And a myriad is 10,000. And we know from the Tao Te Ching that 10,000 represents all of phenomenal reality. So all the phenomenon that you see around you, it all in one thing, it would be represented by 10,000. Nineveh is the Jerusalem of the New Testament. As the great city, or it's called Babylon, is also another great city spoken of as the zodiac. Babylonians were very much into astrotheology. And that's where we believe a lot of the New Testament came from, or the Bible came from. 12 myriads give it away again. So great city, and then you have 12 myriads. And that's basically the details you have about this Nineveh. And the 12 signs of the zodiac are multiplied by the symbol of 10,000. So then you have 10,000 per month. Character Moses likewise lived 120 years. You have the 12 tribes of Israel. You have the 12 stars around the woman's head in Revelation chapter 12. You have the 12 disciples of Christ. And of course, these all are based on the 12 constellations the sun travels through each year. Because the ancients were much more accustomed to paying attention to cycles for agricultural reasons. And then he says, they do not yet know their right hand from their left. Of course, referring to the right hand and left hand path of the artwork, of the spring and the fall, the wisdom of knowledge of good and evil, the rising and falling of the seasons. And that's necessary to become mature in the faith, or to bring life. So once you understand those cycles, you can have faith through the dark seasons, because you know that spring is coming, right? So it ends with the sacred cow and much cattle. It's kind of weird, but he's talking about, of course, the ruling sign of the zodiac for that age, which was Taurus. And of course, being the Old Testament, it would have been the age of Taurus. for 2,000 years or so. Before it was the age of Aries for another 2,000 years, and then it was the age of last 2,000 years until now have been the age of Pisces, and we're going into the age of Aquarius on the great year cycle. So the Alpha and the Omega symbol at the time of Zodiac, the age of Taurus. So that's kind of some evidence that this could have been written as much as 4,000 years ago. And or it would have been they were still inspired by this cow figure. The head in the Hebrew symbol of Aleph looks at the head of a cow. These Ninevites have not been through the seasons of the soul until the end of the story, at least. They have not been through to see the new cattle. So they either loved what their fathers did, whoever wrote this book, and they were into the cycle of the zodiac with the Taurus as the head, or they were into it and they based it on that past time, or it was actually written during that time. However, they were measuring the great year. So you have 120,000 symbolizing other places in the Bible. In 2 Chronicles 20 verse 6, Pekah son of Remaliah slayeth in Judah 120,000 in one day. Whole are the sons of valor. So you have a day cycle, a single day, with the number 120,000. So you can split the day cycle into 120,000. And it's amazing that they could count that in a single day, if that was true history. Technically, King Solomon raised the season out of 120,000, signified by his orders. 1 Kings 5:13, King Solomon lifted up a tribute out of all Israel, and so the tribute is 30,000 men. And he sendeth them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month, by changes, a month there in Lebanon, and 2 months in their own house. And Adoniram is over the tribute. So 5:14, he saith, then sendeth them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month, by changes, a month there in Lebanon, 2 months in their own house. And Adoniram is over the tribute. So the 30,000 are divided into 3 groups of 10,000. This correlates to the cardinal, fixed, immutable signs of each season on the zodiac, which are the initial, middle, and end times of each season, or the 3 constellations in the zodiac, which the sun passes through during each season. If you're a visual learner, that might be good to look at a picture. I'll show you in the next slide. As 10,000 are sent to Lebanon, Lebanon, actually I looked it up, means white, and is in the white-capped mountains. It is not much of a stretch to say that symbolizes the pure white light of the sun passing through each sign of the zodiac. That was given as a tribute by the Solomon, sun and moon, man. You also have this transfiguration of Christ up on the mountain, so that's this interesting idea of him turning white, given white, being clothed in white at the top of the mountain. And so you have sort of the sun doing the same thing, white light of the sun, coming into its glory at the top of the zodiac. Each month, 10,000 is sent to Lebanon, while the other 2 groups spend 2 months in their own house. Signs were called houses in ancient astrology. Another way to say this would be during each month, the sun would pass, and the sun would receive 10,000. And so you could say that the sun was receiving, the white light of the sun of Lebanon was receiving 10,000 symbolically. And therefore, the other ones would, so you have cardinal, fixed, immutable signs in each season. So you could do it for spring, you have it, and for 2 seasons they would rest, and then it has cardinal, fixed, immutable for in the summer, same thing. And you have cardinal, fixed, immutable for fall, and then for winter. So for each season, you would have a cardinal sign receiving the white light of the sun, or being received by the white light of the sun. Either way you want to say it, they were together. And the signs are called houses, and so the other signs would be in their own house, while the other ones would receive the sun as a visitor, or the sun as a visitor would receive them. And that would be how Solomon the Wise symbolizes the 120,000 men or points of consciousness the sun passes through on the zodiac. And it doesn't say women, so that's the sun is masculine consciousness. So you have cardinal, fixed, mutable on each season, like I was saying. Solomon does many other things astrologically, but we won't mention them here. 12 myriads, making significant the 12 tribes, disciples, stars, stones of the high priest's breastplate, which first century Josephus tells us are the 12 signs of the zodiac. And that's pretty much it for today. If you still think Jonah was a history book, I would recommend reading Herodotus, who's a historian before that, which I have here. I can make this a little bit bigger for you. The Histories by Herodotus, and that just explains a little bit why history was written differently than Jonah was written. And that's it for today.